How's it going, everybody? DJ K DuB Omaha, Wired Access Podcast with the All Axcess Granted.
I didn't want that to be the standard. I didn't want someone else in the room to set the standard. I always wanted to do that.
The journey to get there, I think, is something, that is amazing, Nick.
Let's get this podcast started!
Noise from the sellout crowd. Oh! Miller almost decapitated that time.
True freshman. Jones on a half roll, and he is swarmed under. Never had a chance. Moore's going to try it again. And he's sacked at the 9-yard line by Jared. Jones pressure from Tomich, and he got him again back at the 3.
Run with it, 3rd and 1, out of the eye, Elijah Williams has the first down.
That's right. It is Wired Access, All Axcess Granted. We greatly appreciate you hanging out with us. Tonight I have former Husker, Jared Tomich. Jared, welcome to the show. I greatly appreciate you joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, of course, just recently we signed on with characterchronicles.com. So, of course, I've obviously been reaching out to some of the former Huskers. One, it's more telling the journey more than it is to live the limelight and go, we all know how great the 90s were. But I think what happens, and especially with the day and age that we are in today with college football, if we were in today, that team would have never happened the way that it has happened. Players might not have committed like they did to the process. So what I like to share with people is, one, the journey, the story to who you are, but two, the understanding of how, even as a former Husker, how you might look at the way high school football goes, college football goes, and just football in general, because it is obviously not the same that you grew up in the 90s.
Correct.
So welcome to the show, Jared. You're a young kid from Indiana. What kind is your connection when you were a younger kid to football and how you really got into football as a younger kid?
Yeah, for me, I never really touched a football until I was a freshman in high school. So, where I grew up, they didn't have like a Pop Warner or anything like that. So I played all kinds of other sports and was not talented enough to dribble a basketball and didn't want to run up and down a soccer field that much. So I did like one season of that stuff. I was like, nope, that one's not for me. Played a lot of baseball. And then once I got on the football field that freshman year, I fell in love and just dedicated, everything, every minute that I had either on the field or in the weight room. I mean, that's where I was at in high school. If I wasn't on the field, I was in the weight room, and I loved it. Everything I was working towards, in a sense of getting better, was just focused on what am I doing and how does this make me better?
And of course, playing at Indiana or playing in the state, who did you have kind of to look up to? A lot of players have parents, have other relations that they can look back to and go, okay, this is the heritage of my football career. But obviously you stated something that most people have limited to little access now, where they don't start a sport until freshman year of high school and can make it to the ultimate level as you did in yourself.
Yeah. And it wasn't, in the same regard, neither of my parents played any sports at all. And there was no sports in my background, or my family or anything like that. So it was, it was just kind of new for me, and which is interesting now because I have a freshman in high school now, and obviously I'm pouring into him with his, because he just started football, and I look back, and it was my wife and I were talking. We actually I was like, man, who was pouring into me or coaching me, or what was, why was I so driven at that time? Because I didn't have anybody. I had a couple of pro ball players that I looked up to. It was mainly the Raiders. I was a huge Howie Long fan, had the life-size Howie Long poster in my room, Lyle Alzado and Matt Millen and those guys that were they were monsters. And I remember as a kid, every time and you didn't, back then you didn't see all the games. You'd be lucky to see a West Coast game a couple times a year. So every time that there was a Raiders game on, I was hitting the VHS and recording it illegally, from the NFL so that I could study it. But that was it. I guess it was just one of those things that once I played it, it just clicked, and I loved it. From the very beginning from the first day to the last day. At the age of 30, I just absolutely loved it.
Was there a coach or someone that you remember early in your career at high school that gave you what you needed as far as knowledge? I mean, you were well stated there that parents did not know about sports at a college level. You didn't have no guidance from someone like that. How did you understand what it took to even just get good in high school to where you had opportunity beyond high school?
There wasn't, and I don't say it disrespectfully, but everything in high school for me was average as far as, there wasn't anybody, they were all good high school coaches, but there wasn't one individual who just took me under their wing or did anything like that. And so it was just through, and that kind of like exemplifies, my career, even, down the road. It was just for what, just self-motivation and I remember from high school, it was always, I was not the biggest kid. I mean, I was fairly big for a high schooler, but then, later on, everybody was, a head taller than me. I'm only 6'2", so I was a shorty, once I got to the upper, to the college and pros. But it was, it was, I can outwork, everybody, or I can try. Like, nobody's going to outwork me, in my position, and, I'm going to run, I can remember, even like, for instance, at the Saints, I would be running with the running backs, instead of with the D linemen, trying to just push myself, in little ways every day, because I was not the most talented. And I had a very hardworking family. I came from a very blue collar steel mill, working family. And I think that's probably where the roots of the work ethic and that came from.
And of course, when it came to looking for college, what all do you remember, like as far as looking and was there a recruiting process for yourself? I mean, I think what people don't understand is what they see on social media today and what has happened in the past when it came to the recruiting process is a night and day difference, because it isn't like everybody knew you or knew how to find you. How did that all go for you in the high school career?
Yeah, there was, and there was nothing for me in out of high school. There was, so I had learning disabilities, and was later on, after getting to Nebraska, discovered that I was an audible learner. So I had horrible grades, and it wasn't until I was at a lifting competition at a school nearby, which is East Chicago Central. The lifting coach there, was a protege of Boyd Epley's at Nebraska, and he had come to this big school, built this big gorgeous gym, and kind of replicating on a high school level Nebraska's gym. So I went there for this competition, just like fell in love with the facilities, and was able to. I won the competition, and then was sitting there talking with Coach Peterson at this time. And Coach Peterson took the film from the East Chicago Lake Central game where I went to school, sent it to Coach McBride, and said, "You need to take a look at this kid." So he physically took an old VHS tape, shipped it in the mail to Coach McBride, and said, take a look at him. And this was in March, April. So everything was already done. I was anticipating at this point, going to probably work in the mills, going to the union, like a 150 operator, something like that is kind of where I was, focusing on. And Coach McBride called he came out and visited me at school, and he tells the story of walking around the school, and he grabs, and like, so now, Coach McBride now is one of my closest and dearest, people, favorite people in the world. But he tells a story about walking through the hallways of my school, and he grabs these two younger, sophomore, freshmen, or whatever, and says, "Do you guys know Jared Tomich?" And they both, he said they both raved about me, about how nice I was, about how nice of a guy I was, and this, that, and the other. Like, so whoever these two kids were, they got Coach to like hook on, is for me. And so I met with them. They brought me out out for a visit. I had an incredible time, and I can remember thinking at the time, like, this is great, but I don't have the grades for college, and I don't, I have no scholarship. Nobody's offered me anything, but we'll go. And met with Coach Osborne, met with Coach McBride, met the team, it was just great. And they, Coach Osborne, sat me down and said, "Look, we have a program called Prop 48. You can come here next year and go to school. And if you can get your grades up, the next year we'll let you walk on, because there's something there. But we don't have anything for you. We don't have, like, I won't guarantee you anything ever," like type of conversation. And, and so go back home, sit with mom and dad and grandma and make that decision to, we've got a little bit saved up. And, luckily Nebraska back then was not a very expensive out-of-state school. So that was to my advantage. And my folks brought me out, and I got signed up and went to school that fall as a Prop 48. And as a Prop 48, you can't lift with the team. You can't be around the team. It's really stringent rules. It was my job to go to school and get my grades up. And luckily, Coach Osborne had an incredible tutoring program at that time. And they poured all this into me and had all this testing done. And we figured out that I'm an audible learner. So then they were able to take all my books and put them on tape, and then have my professors, all my professors agreed to this too at the time. My professors would after, like, they would have their finals or their tests. I'd go to the professor's office. The professor would read me the test. And it changed my career. It changed my school, in my career in that part. So all of a sudden I started enjoying school. I started excelling in school, even to the point where, I finished my degree in 4.5 years on the dean's list. I mean, to go from 2.0 or below to, graduating in 4.5 years on the dean's list, that was my ultimate payback for Coach Osborne. That, like, he was fine that I got drafted. He was, that's great, this, that, and the other. But for me to finish my degree and do that, for myself, but also to show him, he took that huge chance on me, and how big of a deal it was for me.
Well, and of course, you brought up a great point that I think some people forget is, like, of course, you see all this ADHD and all these things about learning nowadays coming out. Back in the 90s, I mean, I speak to it anytime that anybody asks. I talk about, I lived in Holland. I was an Air Force brat from 88 to 92. One of my brothers had a learning disability, but the Air Force just kept shipping us to base. So we got to travel Germany like it was water. Like, I mean, we went to castles, we went to all these places, but of course I was too young to take advantage, but it was all because they're trying to figure out what was going on. And nowadays there's so much help and so much things. When you look at even just you going through that process of you having what you did in high school, and you got coaches and you got parents and you got friends and family, what was the word even before about you even going to college? Was it more of, that ain't something that's kind of going to be up your alley, we've already seen what you've done? Or was it the other way, where half's in the glass full, half's in the glass empty? Some want to see you go. Some would say, you know what, this college thing is not going to be for you, but we'll let you go. What was that like for you?
Yeah, that was, there wasn't, at that point, there wasn't a whole lot of, and rightfully so, there wasn't a whole lot of folks that could believe that I could even go to school and finish. To the point, my senior year of high school, we had an awards ceremony, and I got the award for most likely to flunk out of college. And I still have that. And when I got to college, that hung up in my dorm. It's just a little plaque. It was all in good fun. I get it, but at the time that was a driving force, And so, you know, it was things like that. I mean, that would like chip away. And, you know, like anybody, you're going to have self-doubt. You're 18, 19 years old, half the time you're like, what am I doing? Type of thing. And it was because of Coach Osborne, Coach McBride, and my teammates, that with all their encouragement and everything that they did, we had great defensive linemen that, that would pour into the younger classmen, just as we did when we were juniors and seniors, for the guys, for the Chad Kelseys and the Mike Ruckers and those guys, under us. And that's, because you learn that this is bigger than you. And this is about developing a program, developing a culture, and you're taught that. So then you teach that. And then you take pride when you leave on how those guys did, knowing that you had a impact on their college careers as well.
And of course, you made a great point of saying you had to raise your grades, just so people understand what that means and what is the minimum that you had to get it up to in that first year, because, one, you got to do this without any guarantee on the other side. If you fail, you fail. There's not going to be anything on the other side, as Coach said. But on the flip side, if you happen to make it, there's still nothing on that other side that's guaranteed, but it could be a driving force to who you obviously became. But what I'm saying is what was the degree of improvement that you knew you had to do, but they hadn't told you how to do it until they started getting you the help?
Right. Yeah. And I think it was like you had to get like a 2.5, just to stay on the team, if I remember correctly. It was in Coach Osborne, obviously with his influence and, how heavy he was into creating good student athletes. That was, he knew, the importance, and he would talk to us endlessly about, if you have the opportunity to play in the pros, it's going to be short in your whole lifetime, and having the education is going to be something you're going to use more than just playing in the league for a couple of years in that regard. So he was just so focused on creating good student athletes and good men. He really was. That was his driving force. And that's how I think they got the recipe for bringing those coaches and all those players together at that time.
And when you look back and you think of then, what was some things and some sacrifices that you were also having to make physically and mentally, on whether you had to produce yourself and create yourself? Because like you said, you didn't have the other teammates in the same weight room pushing you. You had to find self. And I think what people don't understand is when you're trying to learn yourself better and learn what you're doing, but you're also still got to produce yourself to become better, because you're going to go into a field where those guys ahead of you have had not just one, but maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of you. And now you got to start making your mark. It's not just, okay, sweet, you passed that first year. Now, Jared, here you go. Everything's given. It's something you had to earn on your own and on yourself beyond school, because I think people lose that factor that, yes, you got the student athlete part, but you also got the athlete part that you have to go find yourself. And this is where the dogs get separated from those who think they're dogs.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, part of that is having, good upperclassmen that, are helping and, and confident in themselves that they can then, help, underclassmen in that regard. But for me, even that first year, I wasn't really around anybody because I wasn't allowed to lift and everything else. I can remember, because it was such a big deal. We had the Lifter of the Year award, and you had this big, long corridor next to the weight room that had, throughout the years, all the different times that guys would run in the shuttles and the 40s and all the top, 5 or 10 guys of every position, it had, what they lifted, what they did. It was a great wall. And I would just study that wall. And those were my goals. It wasn't the goal of like, and it wasn't the number 10 guy wasn't my goal. Number 1 guy was my goal. and so whether it was, and then it would just take that and just go to the indoor track over there and just work, and just do, and it had great payoff, for that next year.
Of course, you get into your first year and you're amongst a lot of players who have the experience and who's some of the guys that you remember looking up to first? Because of course, you already stated you didn't have this college connection to these type of athletes. I'm not saying I don't know what class you played in at Indiana or how that was retrospect. Like, of course, here in Nebraska, we have Class A, and that's like the highest. But it doesn't mean that Class B doesn't get to the Division I, Class C. These athletes come from all areas. What was that like for you? And just kind of seeing the size around you and having to make adjustments for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there was, and it was pretty neat. So, for me, I had, Trev Alberts and Travis Hill. I had guys like Johnny Perella and Kevin Raymakers. Those were the upperclassmen at that time, when I was a freshman and redshirt freshman after that year after. And then, I had the Dante Jones and the Dwayne Harrises and guys like that. And, so I had, good guys to look up to. But I remember learning, because I didn't know anything about Nebraska football, and I remember learning the culture and the history and the love. And I can still remember the first time I walked into the stadium as a freshman, not on the field, but in the, up in the fans, and up in the, and sitting in the stadium and watching the games and being like, this is amazing. This is the greatest stadium, in college history. And so, it was just all that excitement, and all that opportunity, and just trying to do your best so you don't squander it, and that you make the most of all your time there.
When you look at the college field today and you just think of today and you think of back of that year before we even get into the whole journey through your starting position and all that, do you think in this day and age, someone with what is going on with yourself could not only make it to who you were, but also compete at that level to where you weren't the big dog, you weren't getting recruited, and now you got to prove yourself? And I'm not saying we don't see that. Obviously, we have had the walk-ons. But what we are seeing is more than likely they go, hey, you know what? I'm not going to get a play. I'm not going to get where I want to be because I'm not there already. I'm going to go to D2. I'm going to go to JUCO. I'm going to find some other route or maybe another lower D1 school. Or do you feel like people could still do what you had to do?
I think kids, that are going to be determined enough are going to figure out a way, right? It's going to be a different road. Like you said, it's going to be, they might be at 3 different schools in their career, so that's a whole different, I would have never imagined anything like that. So where they might go, they might even hit a prep school or, go to a JUCO or, do something like that. And then, pop into even a D2 school or lower D1 and then get noticed and even pop again. Seeing the kids and how they move around, it's amazing to me. And it kind of bums me out because one of the best parts about Nebraska is, it was the camaraderie of all the players. And that was so evident, over these past 2 years. We've all come back for the 2 30-year anniversaries, of our national championship games. And we're all 5 minutes back with everybody. And it's like family again. And these guys will never have anything like that because they're not working as a group for years and years and years together. And so that's one of the big things now that bums me out about college football is because you don't have that with your players, with each other, and you don't have that with your coaches. These guys, you're going to bounce around, you're going to look for the next opportunity, you're going to, and you're going to hit the portal. And so my deep-seated love for Coach Osborne and Coach McBride, who brought me there, is unmatched. Like Coach McBride lives an hour and a half from me, right up in Michigan, and he and Miss Debbie are like grandma and grandpa to my kids. we're up there all the time. Like, we spend, just, as much time as we possibly can. They come down here for holidays, and that was all created because, 5 years with him, and also with Coach Samuel, it was just incredible. I had just some incredible coaches, that built all of that, so the kids nowadays, it's just that part bums me out because I feel like they're missing out on some really cool stuff, but they'll figure out ways, if a kid's, just determined and, to make it, it's just a different route. That's all. It's just, it's the same amount of work. It's going to be the same amount of, same amount of all that stuff. It's just, but it's just a different route.
Now, of course, you end up becoming a All-American Husker and joining that great crowd, with your academics. But you, of course, start to gain. What do you first remember when you first got to put on the pads and kind of your growth through the process to who Jared Tomich left as a legacy at being a Husker?
Yeah, it was, and that first year, you go through your knocks because you're a scout team, right? And I remember, going into that, after that Prop 48 year, my redshirt year, and just, being scout team and giving the best look that I could. And it was one of the big things was, we got Coach Osborne was, we got plaques every week. There was a certain amount of plaques for different players, player of the week, defensive player, D-line player. And there was a plaque every week for scout team player of the week. And man, that was, and I've got a bunch of them, and that was my goal, scout team player of the week. Well, the older guys don't always dig on that, because you're flying around and you're trying to give them the best look possible. But, it was just setting small goals and then achieving those small goals and then going to the next. And I can remember after that, that freshman, that redshirt freshman year, going into that next year, the spring game is where everything started clicking for me. And I had a great spring practice. I had a great spring game. And it was like 2 or 3 days after that, Coach Osborne called me in his office and said that they were giving me a scholarship for the next 3 years, which was just amazing. I mean, it was impeccable timing. And it was just, that was when it told me, like, that's where I kind of I finally felt like, well, I can do this. Like I can, it's not a question anymore. Like, they believe in me. So now I have the opportunity to believe in myself even more.
Well, I like that you brought up, one of my favorite things. I mean, they just gave Williams 2 weeks ago. Like, those stories to me get harder because it's earned and it's continued to be earned. Was there ever a time prior to that, even maybe a little bit prior to the spring game, that you ever just wanted to stop and quit and feel like this couldn't be accomplished? Was there ever doubt to where maybe someone had to talk to you to let you know that doubt is not there, get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. That happens all the time, and it's totally normal. You get in those situations and you're questioning yourself and if you can do this. And I can remember that redshirt freshman year, and actually the conversation, which was, it's kind of crazy because it was with an offensive lineman, but Brendan Stye pulled me to the side and we had a great talk. And I looked up to Brendan because he was a monster in the weight room. He was just like, and he still looks like a monster today. I just saw him a couple of weeks ago, but that was a huge pivotal point for me, and having a couple of those conversations here and there with those older guys. It doesn't take much to, pour a little gasoline on somebody's fire and get them burning, and that's what they did, at different times. And it seemed like, every once in a while, you start second guessing, and there would just be somebody there, knocking, saying, keep it up, you got, this is, you're here, you can do this type of thing. But yeah, I wanted to go home all the time. Like, it was just because I thought it was like, it's just a waste of time, especially that Prop 48 year.
See, that's what I tell people. Like, I mean, the story has been over and over, especially at Nebraska, where the names can be said. I mean, Sue didn't even start football until junior in high school. Carricker was a quarterback and didn't play defensive end until senior year. Like those things and understanding, because everybody beats themselves up, and it could be their freshman year in high school all the way up to senior year and think that I still don't have enough, but you never know what you're going to grow into and what you can do. What was the one saying that like everybody gets pushed by a different thing? What do you think your push and drive was to do that? Was it more of the people that believed in you, or was it the fact that you wanted to prove people who didn't that they were wrong? Was it a mixture of both?
It was a good mixture of both, and it's in a good mixture of of wanting to make a obviously make a point and be successful at something, and then still having the coaches and the players and the staff to help back you up. Coach Samuel had a great poster in his office, and it said, "The harder you work, the luckier you get." And I just globbed onto that, and that was my thing, and I'm like, I can, at the end of the day, if I can say that I can work harder than everybody, then I'm leaving everything out there.
You, of course, get your first start or even your first. What is your first play that you remember that you can go back to and go, this is what I'm here for, and this is what I'm doing? How early and what's your first remembrance of that?
That was that was my sophomore year at the Meadowlands, and we were playing up there in the Meadowlands for that preseason game that we had up there, and I got a sack in the very in the first series. I think I ended up getting a sack, and it just from then on it was as my son would say, I like the way that tastes, and I was just after it. It was like, man, that was like, for folks that don't know, the sack is the touchdown of the defensive line. It's like that is the pinnacle. And if it's back in our day, if it was a sack, if it was a hard hit sack, and a strip, that was just, that was it. That's where it was at. So, we played in a little different day too, where we were able to be a little more violent than what the game is today, which absolutely, it's funny when people, because you get the question, like one of the $1 million questions is, what do you miss about the game? And I'm like, just the violence, because you can't do anything like that in life ever again. And that was a lot of fun.
What was your thing? Of course, you talk about this great moment. What was the thing off the field that was able to kind of bring you back settled to who you were? And was this a switch that you're able to go on and off? Of course, there's multiple players that can't do that. There might be times, especially in an early career, where you're finding success, where you're like, how do I turn it on and off? What was Jared Tomich's way to handle those type of situations? Because there's a lot of pressure beyond the game, right? You have fans, you have coaches, you have trying to live up to this big name of Nebraska, or, big position as a defensive end. Sometimes shutting things off isn't as easy as people think.
Yeah. And I was very fortunate, I think, in my upbringing. It was very, very humble upbringing, and was always taught humility. And so I think that led, a lot to, just how I was able to, turn it on when you put the helmet on. And I would get that question all the time from reporters. You're in the locker room after the game, and I'm just like I am now. And they would stop me, halfway through and say, okay, all right, where's the guy that was on the field, 15, 30 minutes ago? And like, yeah, this is, you have to learn how to turn it on and off. And
they're looking for you, and they're looking for you, and they're just going, yeah, boy, throwing bones up in the locker room. Just, yeah, no, man, there's another side of me. Come on,
yep.
now.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So and there are guys that can't turn it off. I've played with them at every level, and so I understand that part too.
As far as when it comes to you said that being an upperclassman and being a leader, what's kind of some of the things that maybe people don't realize an upperclassman has to help the underclassmen with when you do get it, because you obviously got shown the help and now it's your turn to give it back. What's some of the things people don't realize that it goes both ways, come and go, you got to give it, but you probably have seen some people go through some things that you have to redirect them just as someone redirected you to get back on the path.
Absolutely. Well, and that's where Coach Osborne, having his doctorate in psychology, and he was just a master of those things. And what he did, at that time we had the Unity Council, and the Unity Council was one or two players from every position, usually upperclassmen, junior, seniors, and I think, and so they were voted on by the other players, in your position, and they met every week. And if there was disciplinary action for somebody, somebody was missing class, they weren't getting their grades up, so, anything, and then making a lot of small decisions for the team as well. All those things. We had a gentleman named Jack Stark who was just incredible, team psychologist for us, and so the Unity Council, it was amazing leadership thing to be a part of for 2 years like that. And as a player, when you were younger, and if you did, if you missed class, or your grades were slipping, you didn't have to go to Coach Osborne's office. You had to go meet Unity Council, and to let your peers down. That was huge, and that pressure. And so as you got older and you were in that position, that leadership position of the Unity Council, that was just something you take forever, with you, throughout, you use that throughout the rest of your life type of thing. But to be able to, take the guys that need a little, a hand up, it wasn't about, punishment. It was about, trying to redirect, certain players and people to keep them on the right path. And there's so, like you said, there's so many distractions for everybody. How do we help keep them on the right path? Because maybe there's everybody matures at different at different speeds, and some guys come in and they're 18, 19, and maturity isn't there yet, so they just need that that extra hand, and that Unity Council was a huge part of it. And I don't think people realized, especially with a lot of the turmoil we had going on in that those years, a lot of those decisions were all made by the Unity Council, and Coach Osborne allowed that, and then we would take those decisions to him, and he I can't remember very often where he went against what we kind of voted for, type of thing, if ever. I can't remember one real instance that he said, no, you guys aren't right on this one, we're going to go this route instead. And so that whole culture that he created within the team was just awesome.
Why do you think, and obviously I know there's probably some things behind doors that we don't see, but why do you think that might not be big in the cultures now, and something that people look at success? And it's like they always say, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but taking, and that's what football is about, whether you want to admit it or not you, but anybody that's listening. Football is all about taking from someone else and recreating yourself in your ways with just a little bit of twist. But no matter what, you're looking across the way. You're always looking for someone else's quick. Why do you think something like a Unity Council isn't a big thing, or isn't something that's talked about like it was back then?
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the ability of the players just to get up and leave. There's and it's more like it's even in the NFL. You knew going into a season, talk about our defensive line. Wayne's got a 4-year contract. Joe's got a 2-year contract. Leroy's got a 2-year contract. You've got a 3-year contract. So you're working with them, at least for the next couple of years type of thing. And they don't have any of that anymore. And so as for the coaches, and as the older players, you can't, if you're coming down on somebody, it's not just because you're a bully. You're coming down on them just like somebody came down on you to make you better, and because they love you, not because they're trying to, push you or insult you or anything else. It's because there's a genuine want for you to be, better than what, tomorrow than what you are today. And they don't see that now. Now somebody gets their feelings hurt and they're out. They're going to hit the portal. And so I don't think things like that. I mean, unfortunately, I think that's something that we're not going to see much of.
Of course, the best part is there's two things to the Nebraska defense that we always remember. We remember the black shirts and remember throw the bones. For you yourself, who's the OG of throw the bones? And then getting the black shirt, what was that for you? And how did that materialize to you to go, that is a goal, but obviously once I get it, it's not just something that's given, it's something I've earned.
Yeah. And it's something that you have to continue to earn, and keep up. It's just, it's not like you just get it and it can never be taken away type of thing. But Christian Peter was really the first, if I remember correctly, that threw those up, and then that just kind of took off from there with Grant and Jason Peter and the rest of the crew, throwing the bones and just, getting everybody fired up. I mean, that was such a kind of cool thing with the black shirts that, and Coach McBride, came up with the black shirts, before we were there. But it was such a cool honor system, because second team had gold shirts, first team had black shirts. And, when you got your gold shirt, like that was a big deal. You're like, man, okay. It gave you different tiers to get to. And again, creating small goals, attaining those goals, and then collectively as a whole, at the end, you've made it to where you want to be, by getting to those steps through the way. It was very cool.
Well, of course, you're a two-time national champion. When you look at that first one in '94, what's the impact that you felt you were able to provide, and that you not only did, but then you also, what was the biggest thing that you learned from that season to catapult you into the '95 season for yourself?
Yeah, we had a great season, and it was, it was the year before, when we lost to Florida State at the end there. And
can I just say one thing? I seriously cried, and I've told this to Trev Alberts because I've been blessed to interview him not once but twice when I used to do a radio show. But
cool.
That's my first remembrance of really being a Husker fan to that extent, to like the full all and out. Is I remember watching that kick, and man, I'm joking. I'm not going to cry, but I seriously, as a young kid, that was my thing of going, man, the kick, that can't happen. And then, of course, like you were going into.
Yeah. And so, from that point, getting into that next season, and we had a great season, but it was really, I think, when we hit that Miami game, and being such underdogs, and just listening to Coach Osborne, sticking to our game, and watching a very, very arrogant Miami team come in there, and just it was, and even by halftime, Coach Osborne's speech at halftime, you've probably seen it, where it's just, we're going to stick to what we're doing. We're going to start, and we're going to start winning, and we're going to wear these guys out. And for him to, not abandon what he had planned that whole time and stick to it and get us to stick to it. It was like, after that game, it was like, okay, we're for real. This is, we got something really, really special here.
Of course, you go into your '95 season and you guys win again. But of course, for you, this is probably where all the NFL stuff starts coming, right? You get people looking, you hear the conversation. You've seen players before you go through that conversation. What do you remember about players prior to you that maybe they've talked to you about? And then your personal experience of seeing your production on the field start hearing on the outside of the field.
Yeah, so that was, my first year that I started. And that first year that I was honored enough to make All-American and get some, an All Big Eight and some of the different accolades. And I remember when Chris Anderson, who was our media director, called me into her office and said, "Hey, just wanted to let you know you made All-American." And I had no idea what that was. It wasn't something that was ever on my radar. And then to have that whirlwind of, from that end of that season to the next season with all the accolades and being, a two-time All-American, and then all the preseason All-American, and having the opportunity to go on like the Bob Hope show. I mean, there was just, in the Lombardi finalist and all stuff like that. There was just so many cool opportunities that came along with a lot of those accolades, for those 2 years. Stuff that is just, I'll never forget. It was a great time.
What was the change in the pressure for you, and how were you able to control that part of it? Because with more recognition brings more desire to have to be better. How were you able to control those two things at once?
Yeah, and it was, my senior year, I was not as, I still got the awards and accolades, but I did not get I didn't have the numbers that I wanted to have. Okay, so because now I was recognized as a player and a chaos creator on the field. So I had a tackle and a tight end and lots of times a running back that was chipping me. And so that allowed, and so I had to kind of, work through that and remember that, it's not about me. It's about us winning. It's about the team. So if they're using so many resources on me, then that's given my teammates the opportunity to just fly around and crush it. And, I still had fun, we still did good, but that was a big deal, trying to, just work through, the recognition. I remember, being like, halfway through being like, man, I wish I didn't get that, because, these guys wouldn't know who I was. But yeah, it's still, that's where the whole team comes into play, and you're playing for each other.
What was the one legacy that you felt you were able to leave as a Husker and know that you accomplished something that most people might have given up in year one, let alone finishing where you finished?
I think with Nebraska, it's the fans. I still get fan mail from Nebraska folks, and it's like, okay, 30 years later, I'm doing a podcast with you, and like that part's amazing. Like that the fans actually want to hear from players of our generation. And that's one of the coolest parts. Like that's unheard of, and for me growing up outside of Chicagoland, that's like the equivalent of the 85 Bears, in Chicagoland. 85 Bears still to this day cannot do anything wrong. Like they still and
all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's that feeling that you go back, and when I do come back, we come back for usually one game a year at least, and it's just you're treated so well, and there's so much recognition, and you gave so many fans so much happiness in that time that we were there. And because of and we were just because we were able to win as much as we were, and just who the team was, we have the greatest fans in the world, and that just goes to show that how what kind of team and every camaraderie and everything that we had kind of all together. It was just it was perfect match altogether.
Where did Jared Tomich find his happiness in those 4 years? And also, would you have changed anything to go anywhere else?
No, never. And I can say that because, so, with that junior year, I had that breakout year, my junior year. And then all of a sudden, all these scouts are calling and they're saying, are you going to go into the draft? You're going to go into the draft, right? You have the opportunity to be probably a first, possibly a first rounder, second rounder, you're going to go into the draft. And it never crossed my mind. Like, no, I came here. I made an obligation. Coach Osborne and Coach McBride took chances on me, and I'm here. Like, I don't, I'm going for my senior year, and there was no question in my mind, so no, I wouldn't have changed anything. I had to take all the bumps and bruises, and I had to make all those choices that I made to get me to that point that I got to, and it was a great road.
Of course, you said about Husker fans, and for me, this is like the second time that I've gotten, well, more than second time. I've been blessed enough with everything that I've done. My first one was interviewing Eric Strickland. So when I was a young kid, I graduated in 2000. I played NBA Live, and I'd always throw Eric Strickland on every team I had. Well, Jared, I just want to give you the same props that I gave Eric. This here is a complete circle for me. Why? Because when I played any Madden, I always threw my Husker guys on my Niners, because it is proven from when I was in Holland. I have a little card that says favorite football team on a soccer card. Yes, it says favorite football team, and it says San Francisco 49ers, because at that time it was Roger Craig and Tom Rathman. So I do want to give you that, because you did bring a great point of saying it was because the fans still to this day, 30 years plus later, are willing to listen to the story and listen to the journey. And for me, I'm always about, if I can get one more person to hear a story like this, where they think, one, you proved it with the learning disability. You proved that you're able to get above and beyond what anybody ever thought Jared Tomich would be. Two, you're also able to personalize the fact that there are things that you went through that people struggle to this day, that has never changed, even though when people go through it now, they're still going, I'm alone. I'm the only one going through this. And if we can help one more athlete or one more parent to go through this process and go, just because you don't have the resources doesn't mean there aren't people and options out there. It's just a matter of listening to the possibilities from others, that, hey, if we can find you the right help. And obviously sharing your story of the Prop 48, how impactful do you think that is for who one Nebraska is still to this day, but also the opportunity for other athletes that had your same journey of that exact issue, not being able to teach themselves the way that everybody else can learn?
Yeah. Well, it was a perfect example of that at that time. I was blessed and had a big layout in Sports Illustrated, and they focused a lot on my story and about my learning disability, and the outpouring that I got over the next, even when I was in the league, over the next, 3, 4, 5 years, from parents, from kids, and just, how impactful that was. And, people coming up, randomly, in the middle of Florida, and had a family come up that recognized me and was like, and just shared their story. That was incredible, to think that you have, a little bit of impact on folks, and have it can just, maybe change, their outlook, and give them a little bit of encouragement with your story. It's incredible.
Of course, you go, we'll end up here as we're getting closer to that hour that I like to keep people under for their respect of their time. But of course, for me, what I love is the stories of the NFL. What all do you remember of the combine and your thoughts prior and then going through it? I say that because, of course, Carricker said that was the worst thing he ever experienced, and he loved the game just as much as you.
As far as the combine, he didn't dig on that.
No, he didn't like all the extra stuff and the like. I mean, because people don't understand, it's not a high buy. It's all these questions. You could be exhausted. They're going to get you at the worst because they want to see how you react in the worst.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and I made the decision and went to the Senior Bowl, right after college, and in practice had a guy. They actually had me playing middle linebacker. Had an offensive lineman slip his helmet, went into my ankle and broke my ankle. So I show up at the combine in a cast, and so that was a big deal. Being hobbling around. Now it's a broken bone. It's gonna heal just right, but everybody is getting everybody's getting a look, and I can't run. I lifted. I did my bench. And that was all I could do, and then go talk to teams. So the combine was it was cool to be there. And to be invited and all that good stuff, but I couldn't perform. Luckily, with being at Nebraska, when I announced that I was having my pro day, I had every team come out to Nebraska for my pro day, which was pretty cool. There was scouts and coaches that came out, like I think it was like 30 days later, because you've got that about 2-month window between the combine and the draft. And my ankle healed up great, and I was able to perform. But I was nervous, with having a broken ankle at the combine. It was, not the way I saw it going. A few months prior to that. But yeah, I didn't mind the process. And then, but it was a crazy time, with all the, the agents calling and the teams calling and just, you're getting pulled in so many different ways. And for me, that was, that's why my junior and my senior year, I took a bunch of summer school classes because I wanted to finish. If I had that opportunity to go to the league, I wanted to be done at December, when my college career was over, because I knew, like a lot of guys, you start getting into that combine, you start getting all that stuff. If you got a couple extra credits, you're going to be distracted. You're not going to get your school done. So for me, it was a big deal to get that degree in the wintertime. So then I didn't have to worry about any of that, and I could just focus on getting into the league and talking to everybody and going to everything. And so for me, the process was a little bit cleaner, being that I had graduated already.
Now, I'm not saying everything's going to be the same today, but what would be one thing that, if you look back to senior Jared Tomich and you're getting prepared for this, that you wish you knew that maybe some athletes should know even today, of what to be prepared for when it comes to that? Because I'm not, of course, when you go to D1 college, you are playing with some of the best, but when you're going to an NFL combine, that is the best of the best there. And I say that because some people do disrespect, even at the NFL level, what the game is about.
Oh, absolutely. And the amount of egos that are at the combine and at all that different stuff, it's like, there's a lot of guys that could keep that in check a little more. So that's that's completely part of that. But I think for somebody that's getting out of college and going to the pros, and you have that opportunity, I think the more outgoing you can be with the teams, and the more personality that you can have pop through, because that's what they're, that's a big part of what they're looking for too. They see you on film. When they sit down with you, they want your personality. Okay, who is this guy when his helmet's off? And if you can, properly, speak and portray yourself in a good light, I think that just magnifies the team's outlooks on you.
Of course, you get drafted, and you get drafted by the New Orleans Saints. What do you remember about that moment? And who were you with? And I believe possibly with parents, I don't know, but obviously seeing how they support you through all this, but just knowing that everything added up for you. You got your high school diploma, you got to a college, you got through college, you got that college diploma, and now you're getting the ultimate call that people dream of, But if you look back to a freshman Jared Tomich, that was not the full dream. It was just getting into something that was faster, quicker, funner, and you can lay some pain.
Yeah, and so it was. It wasn't until the that draft day, and it's funny because you see all the hoopla around the draft today, which is cool. I was actually that morning at home with my mom and dad putting a fence up with my dad. I knew the draft was going on. I was excited for it, but I didn't know, when or where or what, where I was gonna be, and I didn't have any like visions of grandeur of what what could be. And I remember, all morning we were putting fence up, and then we took a break, had lunch, and we were watching a little bit later, and actually took a nap and woke up, and I'm watching, and Coach Ditka, this was his first year back, into the NFL. And well, everybody's a big Ditka fan up here. He was, and so we're watching and watching, and we're like, man, I wonder, he was taking, because back then you had 15 minutes to take your pick. And I can remember, we were like, come on, coach, pick somebody. Let's keep this moving. And the phone rings, and it's Coach Ditka. And I still remember just stuttering my words, and him being like, hey, I just want to let you know that I'm picking you, with the 39th overall pick, and, can't wait to see you tomorrow. And I had no conversations with the Saints prior. It was a total out of left field for me. And so that was a super cool, moment. And I can remember still stuttering on the phone, and him being like, hey, go watch the TV. They're about to call your name. And be like, yes, sir. And, so that was incredible. And then I think it was the next evening, I was flying out to New Orleans and starting the process.
What would you say is the biggest thing that you noticed from your jumps from high school to college to pro that you now can look back and go, those are the things that people should know as you grow? Yes, the game gets faster and all that, but I only say this because, of course, I had a close connection with someone like a Tommy Armstrong. And what he said is, as he got older, and I think I even talked to a Chris Bober, and he even said, the thing that I learned as I got older is your mental game for football changes, the speed changes. You have to process way different. And if you can slow it down to your speed, whatever speed you're at, either here,
Yep.
the game just goes smoother for you. What was your biggest thing as you kind of progressed?
Yeah, well, and I remember, that first camp, in New Orleans, and being a defensive end, I was going against a gentleman named Willie Rofe, who at that time was probably a 7 or 8 year All-Pro. Willie and I became good friends through the years. But I can remember that first practice. He I'm trying to move, pass rush on him, and I'm literally staring at the clouds. Time and time again, I'm on my back, and I'm going, what is going on? What is he doing to me? I'm like, why am I not, not having any success? But practicing against somebody like that every day was then what made me successful, in the league. And, Big Willie was just awesome to, be around and play, because he was just, he practiced hard. And so I enjoyed that, and we had a lot of fun during practices. But that speed and the strength in the game, and like you were saying, the processing, it probably took me a good year, a good season. I remember going into that second year and going into camps and going into the practices and stuff, and things started slowing down. So, things start, where that first year plays just are happening, and the ball's hiked, and the quickness of the play, the reactions with the offensive plays and how fast they happen. That second year, it started slowing down, and then it started clicking, and it started doing more. And I started getting my groove of how I was going to play in the league, because I just couldn't run over everybody like I ran over everybody in college. That didn't work no more. I figured that out real quick, and I had to move these big guys. I had to get them to move their feet if I'm going to beat them. and so that was a whole different. I had to really transform my game, and to get to that level.
If you look back at your career all the way through, what position would you have really wanted to play? And would that have extended your pro career? And how did your pro career come to an end?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it would have, so as I played at New Orleans, my first 3 years, I was left defensive end. That's my natural good position. And if we were in a 3-4, but if, or I'm sorry, we were in a 4-3 defense. And so that outside, outside defensive end is my natural position. When Coach Dicka got fired and Coach Hazlitt came in my fourth season, they moved me to 3 technique, to a tackle. And I made the team at tackle, even to my surprise, because I had never played tackle before. And then from there on out, my career kind of changed in the league. When I went to Green Bay, they had me at 3 technique and they had me at nose. And, I was 300 pounds playing nose and having fun. Come in for a second, buddy. So it was, that was a big deal. I had to show you my son. He found his Halloween. He found his Halloween costume. Come here. This is my youngest. This is his Halloween costume. We've been trying to figure out what he's gonna be.
Legit helmet too.
Yep, legit helmet. That's awesome, buddy. Love it. That is fantastic.
Those are the moments that people don't understand. Like, this is why I love the live. I love the, especially family, because those are the reason that we continue to do what we do and live. And I appreciate you sharing your son. That's your youngest. How many do you got?
2 boys.
2 boys.
Yeah.
What's their ages now?
15 and 10. So Jackson and Jude. Yeah. And so, yeah, they're.
He asked if he could interrupt you, and I was like, with this costume.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was cool.
Hey, man, I appreciate your story. I appreciate you sharing. What ended up turning your NFL career? You're kind of getting there towards the end, which is okay. Yeah. We'll get right back to it. But you got moved to that nose, and obviously 300 pounds is not the nose. I mean, I remember Gilbert Brown for the Packers. When we're talking about those, fridge, those are the people I'm thinking of when I think of nose guard.
Well, and that's who I played with, was Chili. Gilbert, and so Gilbert would go in on first and second down, and then I'd go in on pass rushing downs, and I at nose, and it's a whole different world down there. There's stuff flying everywhere down there. I like being out on the outside on my island, and that's a good time out there.
Give me that 9 technique.
9 technique. Yeah, that's where it's at. Being down in the middle and being head up on center. Golly, there's just stuff flying everywhere. So it was a whole different game, and it was out of my natural position. I still made it in the league and played, for a couple of years at that position. Still had fun, but I just, if I could have done anything different, it would have been to keep that opportunity at left end. Because being at a lighter weight at that time, I played best at about 270. When I got up to 300 and 310 at Green Bay. It was just, I didn't have the speed and didn't have the quickness that I needed to, but I had to have a little more lead in my pencil, or I was just going to get pushed around down there. So I had to put on as much as I could.
Now, of course, you've experienced and seen the ups and downs of the Huskers. How is it as a former player? What's the biggest take for yourself, and how do you keep even keel through the process? Of course, as a fan and a person who, I coached high school football, so I say it from a coaching standpoint. There's a lot of things that I look differently at football when you look at football in that depth. Like when we weren't winning, I stopped looking at the wins-loss because that is what it is. I more was looking at the process, how the defense was holding each other accountable, how when the safety was doing his job of telling someone to move and they're not moving, and just seeing how the team togetherness was not there these many years, and how there was more individuals than there was what you talked about from your history of the cohesiveness. And people don't look at it that way when you're the average fan. They're just like, oh, we lost another close one. But when you look at the meat and potatoes and you're a person who has played at an all-time level as you have, you kind of look at it different. But being a person who has given the blood, sweat, and tears, that just adds a little more tea to that aspect compared to what I see it as, where you have your feelings, but you also know how this roller coaster can go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I speak for all the former Husker players in the regard, like there's such a, you have such a pride for the program, and to see to see it struggle, and for years to see the program struggle, and we ride the wave as former players, just like all the fans do, of optimism. Like we made some changes, we got it this year. We can, you see it, and you go to a couple of practices, and you're like, ooh, they look good. They're okay. We can, they're gonna and it's just been, it's been a huge bummer. I mean, just because you want so much more for them, you want them to experience, like I want all these kids to experience what I experienced, and what comes with winning. Like, I mean, it's just so much more fun when you win. It's just the nature of it all, and so you take so much pride in the program, and you just want them to have success. And so it's rough to watch at times. And yeah, when I watch film, or I still call it film, when I watch a game, I can't help but just break it down and start breaking film down. It's just natural from watching the hundreds and thousands of hours that I watched of film throughout my life. I'm watching the defensive and offensive lines, and breaking down what's going on, and so, yeah, I watch it with a little bit different eye probably than what most folks do, where they're actually enjoying the game, and I'm critiquing and taking notes.
That's why I love the fact that lately I've just been like DJing watch parties, so then I can just stay to myself. Don't have to have people close. Obviously, I'm cheering and making noise and making sure everybody's in, but I'm getting to watch it the way I want. I'll get you out of here on this. I mean, I greatly appreciate first your time, your story, and especially your son bringing that on. But when you look at what you've seen, you said you've studied, do you feel there's more coaching than it is players, or is that something you can tell from the film that you're able to watch?
I think film watching is kind of a lost art too in the game, from what I can know and kind of hear. I mean, I would sneak up to the coaches' offices after hours and put game film on for hours, and so, because I was looking for any nuance that I could get to be, just this much better, and now these kids have an incredible opportunity with, literally, they can go watch practice right after practice on their iPad, on the Huddle app. I mean, it blows my mind. I mean, my son and I watch his practice after practice, or after a game. We can watch it by 10 o'clock that night. We can watch the stinking game and break it down. And it's such a tool that they can be using to make themselves better. And I think for whatever reason, I think a lot of film watching and breaking it down and is kind of fallen to the wayside. Maybe because the opportunity is it's so easy to do now. But I mean, we watched hours and hours, and you just pick up the little nuances of an offense or of an offensive lineman, and you get
there.
Yeah, you need those little, to beat them. You got to have those little aspects in it where you can see the way their foot moves, or their hand goes down, or where they're looking, or it's just, and we didn't have the greatest film. Like now you can zoom in and really see, like, you can darn near see where the running back's looking. I mean, it's incredible. But yeah, I think film work is something that the kids could really use more of.
Well, once again, I greatly appreciate anybody and everybody that checks us out, especially when you find our series on characterchronicles.com. Thank you to Adam and his team for bringing us on. And then, of course, this wonderful StreamYard could not happen with without the Omaha Beef, as I rebranded their podcast, and you'll see it'll be on tomorrow, and there'll be a video at the end of this, but they allow me to use the StreamYard so then I could bring on someone like Jared, who you're still in Indiana, is that correct?
Yes. Yep. Still in Northwest Indiana. Yeah. Right where I grew up. Just a little further south. We got our little farm down here. So.
Yeah. Be able to bring on players from all across the country and just share their story. And hopefully one athlete or one fan finds something that they didn't know about Jared, or even just to me, what it does is just take the passion to another level. I do also want to give a shout out to Hyper Highlight on YouTube, as because of them, that's how I got a little bit of highlight reel to start the show off with Jared Tomich, because as you could see, and I think Jared made a great point, you couldn't see no eyes in those videos. You couldn't see the high detail that people get nowadays. But once again, Wired Access, All Axcess Granted, where we were live with Jared Tomich, 2-time national champion. And, Jared, we might as well give it to him before we get out of here. Just a little bit of throw the bones one last time, Go and give him a little throw the bones, sir.
Thanks for having me. Yep.
Time.
I appreciate it greatly. It was a great interview.
The standard is the standard. We set the standard.